Hi everyone, I'm Takunjin Panya, one of the reporter for this evening. My topic is motor learning concepts and research methods and conditions of practice. Motor learning is induced by experience or practice and can take place with the intention to learn but also without, indeed, even without conscious awareness that something has been learned. It means motor learning is the shaping of individual sensory motor capabilities by the physical and social environment. It is based on the changes of neural networks of the brain that enable a relatively permanent and improvement of performance, even though this may not always be manifest. In our society, people attempt to learn many different motor skills for a variety of purposes. Some skills are very complex and difficult to perform while others are easily learned. Sports scientists are always searching for the most effective training approaches to help learners efficiently master the required motor skills in the minimal time. So, they have five characteristics of the motor learning process. First is motor learning is an interval process that cannot be observed from external perspective. So, this means that how much an athlete has learned is an unknown factor from an outsider's perspective because motor learning takes place inside the learner's brain and the muscular movements are only reflections of brain activities. Observing motor performance provide only an indirect assessment of the learning progress of a learner. So the second one is motor learning is a set of process for the purpose of reaching specific learning objectives. So obviously different types of learning will produce different results and sports scientists continuously search for the best motor learning process for particular motor skills based on individual differences. So third is the goal of motor learning is to form the designated motor behavioral habits through a proper training. A key aim of motor learning is to help patients reach a stage where he no longer relies on the feedback to perform a task. The learner will have developed his/her own sense of the correct or most effective way of performing a task. And four is once a motor skills is learned, it becomes relatively permanent and will not be easily forgotten. So it is used to indicate the opposite of learning, in that learning refers to the acquisition of the capability for movement, whereas forgetting refers to the loss of such capability. It is likely that he process and principles having to do with gains and losses in the capability for moving will be different, but the terms refer to the different directions of the change in this capability. Forgetting is a term that has to do with the theoretical constructs, just as learning does. Memory is a construct and forgetting is the loss of memory. So, forgetting is a concept at a theoretical rather than a behavioral level of thinking. So for example, once an individual has learned how to ride a bike, he/she will never forget how to do it. On the behavioral level, learning is evidenced by relatively permanent gains and performance, while forgetting is evidenced by relatively permanent losses and performance or losses and retention. So if you understand what measures of behavior suggest about learning, then you also understand the same about forgetting. Remember that we cannot measure forgetting directly. Like learning, it must be inferred from performance. As such, an inability to retrieve a specific memory may only reflect a problem with the retrieval mechanism and not a memory itself. So a good example of this phenomenon is behavior after head trauma when a loss of memory is evidenced by forgetting. So in the time, however, the person is usually able to retrieve the informations and thereby demonstrate the memory was intact all along, but the retrieval process were temporarily impaired. And the last one are, according to Wang and Yang 2012, motor learning is not value-free and it can be negative to form. So this is the 5 characteristics of motor learning. Applications of motor learning to related professions. So motor learning is a subject with broad implication from which people teaching in many fields can benefit. The emphasis in teaching can be quite varied and is based on the purpose of the motor learning, the particular motor skills required, and the needs of the learners. For example, at elementary school level, youngsters are taught basic motor skills such as kicking, throwing, jumping, running, catching, or climbing, and these learned skills can then be transferred to various sports-related movements in the future. So according to Harter's perceived competence motivation theory, when an individual perceives him or herself to be good at doing something, his or her motivations to engage in this activity is enhanced as well. The more successful the students are at the mastering motor skills, the more likely they are to keep playing sports as their lifelong leisure activities. In other words, the effective teachings of motor skills to students in school setting will directly impact their future lifestyle and exercise habits. And understanding basic scientific methods in the motor learning process. Practitioners regularly have to face challenges and solve practical problems they may experience. So generally speaking, they gain their knowledge either through scientific approaches or from real-life experiences through trial and error approaches. Any knowledge they gain based on their experience must be validated through scientific methods, and then the knowledge gained can become theory. If this knowledge is not validated through scientific method, it is called empirical knowledge. The advantages of the empirical approach for gaining knowledge are that it is inconvenient, flexible, and case-oriented. The disadvantages are that the result may be biased, invalid, or unreliable. Conditions of practice is the active process of attempting to perform a task, and it leads to the acquisition of skills. So in condition of practice, in order to be effective, practice trials usually need to be repeated many times. How much practice is needed to learn movement skills? Children with severe disabilities lack many functional of motor skills. I suggest that many of these children would benefit from more opportunities to practice their motor skills. Factors affecting motor learning in these populations include the inability to practice many motor skills without assistance or physical support, and slower rates of learning. Common sense would suggest that increased practice of a task would enhance learning and skill acquisition in a task. So our next topic is evaluation of a field of study and methodology for studying motor performance. So motor performance is the ability to perform a motor task. Motor performance is the appropriate and efficient control of a motor process, the movements of the body in such function as dancing, jumping, running, and walking. What is an example of motor performance? A is motor skills. Motor skills refers to the skilled use of body functions and structures for purposeful movement. Examples: include manipulating objects, fine motor coordination, reaching for objects, gross motor coordination, maintaining pace during tasks, sitting upright, rolling, standing, walking, and etc. Letter B is process skills. Process skills refers to the skilled use of body functions and structures to carry out a task. Examples include selecting and interacting with tools and objects, sequencing steps, staying on task, asking questions, and modify performance when encountering problems. And last is social interaction skills. Refers to the skilled use of the body functions and structures to interact appropriately with others in any given social situation. So for the example is include initiating conversation, communicating verbally and with gestures, responding to touch from others, displaying emotions, inhibiting behavior, taking turns, and etc. And that's all. Thank you.